A chill clings to the morning air as you wander through the narrow streets of Santiago, the capital of a Spanish colony that thinks itself calm but constantly shivers under the weight of unseen pressure. Cobblestones gleam faintly from the dew horses' hooves clatter, and the scent of roasted maize wafts from market stalls, yet there's a stillness that feels staged. Merchants call out prices, but their eyes dart nervously when Spanish soldiers pass by, muskets resting casually yet threateningly on their shoulders. You hear the clang of church bells calling the faithful to Mass, and with it comes the faint echo of authority, reminding everyone who truly rules here. Spanish officials draped in stiff uniforms stride through the plazas with the arrogance of owners rather than guests, while local Criollo elites nod politely, hiding resentment behind smiles sharper than their swords. Chile in this early 19th century is far from the bustling modern country you know. It is a remote outpost of Spain's empire, a long strip of land wedged between the Andes and the Pacific, valuable mostly for its wheat and wine and for the silver and gold that ships back to Europe. The colony seems quiet, obedient even, but this quiet is deceptive. You sense how people here chafe under the restrictions of colonial trade, where Spain dictates what you can sell, what you can buy, and even what ideas you are allowed to think. Books carrying dangerous notions of liberty are banned, but they still slip into hidden corners, tucked under coats read by candlelight, in rooms where whispers have to substitute for speeches. Historians still argue whether these books alone planted the seeds of rebellion, or whether local grievances had already prepared the soil. Perhaps both are true. As you stroll past the governor's palace, the contrast between Spanish power and local pride becomes impossible to ignore. There's the stiff-backed viceroyalty officials wielding titles that sound grander than the crumbling buildings they govern from. And then there's the Criollo families, Spaniards born in the Americas, rich enough to own haciendas, yet never allowed to wield real power. They send their children to study in Europe and return with new, unsettling ideas. Words like rights and self-determination stick to their tongues like honey and poison. Meanwhile, the indigenous Mapuche, unconquered in their southern lands, remain both a reminder of resistance and a thorn in Spain's side. You hear their names spoken with equal parts fear and respect, as though they embody a freedom the colonists crave but have not yet dared to seize. In the evenings, Santiago glows with lantern-light shadows stretching long across adobe walls. You slip into one of the elegant salons where wine flows and violins hum, and you realize these gatherings are not as innocent as they seem. Beneath polite conversation there is plotting. Over the clinking of glasses, voices lower when the servants leave the room, and suddenly the words spill out: complaints about trade restrictions, disgust at the corruption of officials, admiration for the revolutions brewing elsewhere. You catch someone mentioning the United States, another whispering about the French. Every name of a faraway rebellion seems to light a tiny flame here in the Andes. Yet for now it's just talk. Out on the streets, Spanish troops patrol more often than they need to. Their presence is both protection and threat, a reminder that the crown is still watching. At the same time, the city's churches offer a different kind of authority. Priests preach obedience, but some of them quietly question whether God truly favors kings who ignore justice. You stop by the San Francisco church where the candles flicker against centuries-old stone, and a friar slips you a pamphlet written in an almost rebellious tone. You fold it quickly into your coat. After all, you wouldn't want to be caught with it. One afternoon, you climb the slopes of Cerro Santa Lucia, the hill that watches over Santiago. From here, you see the city sprawling beneath you, its tiled roofs gleaming under the sun, while beyond the horizon, the Andes rise like a wall of frozen fire. The beauty is breathtaking, but there's something else you notice: the roads leading in and out of the city, where soldiers ride with messages and merchants bring goods. This place is not as isolated as it pretends. Ideas like the wind find ways to slip through. Somewhere far away, Napoleon Bonaparte is causing chaos in Europe, and though you don't know it yet, his actions will ripple all the way here, across the ocean, shaking the very ground under your feet. As night falls, you pass by a humble tavern where the lower classes gather. There's music, guitars strumming, softly voices singing songs of longing, and there's laughter, the kind that masks frustration. Someone jokes about taxes and the room erupts in ironic cheers. The Spanish authorities think they have control, but you can feel it. The colony is restless. The stars above glimmer like watchful eyes, and you sense history holding its breath. For now, Santiago sleeps under a fragile calm, but beneath its surface rebellion quietly stirs like embers, waiting for the right gust of wind to burst into flame. Morning mist lingers low across Santiago's rooftops as you drift through a marketplace louder than usual, the hum of voices rising with a strange urgency. It's no longer just trade, there's an undercurrent to every conversation, like a river swelling unseen beneath the ground. The Criollo merchants count coins with more pride than deference, and some dare to speak openly against the restrictions Spain imposes on their businesses. You overhear a farmer complaining about taxes, his words sharp and bitter, but what catches your ear is how those around him nod in agreement rather than shushing him. The seeds of rebellion do not sprout loudly, they push through cracks quietly unnoticed by those too busy keeping control. You wander to the outskirts of Santiago, where haciendas stretch across the land, their white walls glowing faintly under the morning sun. Here, the landowners' wealthy criollos begin to gather for more than social visits. Behind closed doors, voices grow louder, arguments flare, and plans begin to form. These men, born in Chile but denied true power by Spanish authorities, share the same frustration. They govern their estates, but not their destiny. A few of them have read about the revolutions in North America and France, whispering names like Washington and Lafayette as if they were old friends. Yet others hesitate, worried about what upheaval might mean for their wealth and order. Historians still argue whether these elites were driven more by ideology or by their own desire for autonomy. You suspect both motives tangle together like vines, hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. In town, students at the Convictorio Carolino, one of Santiago's prominent schools, begin passing around writings filled with ideas so radical they could be considered dangerous. They read about natural rights, freedom of trade, and even republicanism. You see them scribbling in margins, debating quietly in the corners of the courtyard, glancing around nervously to make sure no soldier overhears. Meanwhile, priests sympathetic to these notions preach sermons with subtle double meanings, praising virtue while hinting that tyranny is a sin against God. Even those not explicitly rebellious begin to question whether Spain's authority is divinely justified. One evening, you find yourself inside a dimly lit salon where the air feels thick with tobacco smoke and excitement. The room glows with candlelight reflected in the polished wooden furniture, but it's the voices that command your attention. Bernardo O'Higgins, a name you'll come to know well, speaks passionately about self-rule and pride in the land of his birth. He's young, idealistic, but his words have a sharpness that cuts through the polite murmurs. Nearby, other men, lawyers, landowners, intellectuals, lean in, some nodding eagerly, others frowning in caution. They argue about loyalty to the crown versus loyalty to their homeland. Glasses of wine clink as they toast to ideas they can barely admit aloud. This is not yet rebellion, but it is no longer mere discontent either. It is the beginning of something irreversible. By day, the Spanish authorities remain oblivious, or perhaps they choose to believe these whispers are harmless. Soldiers parade through the streets, their uniforms crisp, their muskets gleaming. The governor continues to host balls and official gatherings, projecting an image of control. But even during these events, conversations stray into risky territory. At one such reception, you overhear an officer muttering about Spain's troubles in Europe, how Napoleon's ambitions are weakening the motherland. The comment draws nervous laughter, but the spark it ignites is clear. If Spain falters, why should Chile remain chained? As weeks pass, the tension becomes tangible. Markets buzz with rumors as much as trade. Pamphlets appear in unexpected places, tucked under doorsteps, slipped into the hands of those willing to listen. They speak of rights of autonomy and of a future no longer tied to a distant king. You see one posted on a wall late at night, its ink smudged, but its message burning clear. Viva Chile Libre. Someone quickly tears it down before dawn, but the words linger in the air like a scent you can't erase. Meanwhile, outside Santiago, other regions stir as well. In Concepcion, Talca, and the countryside, local leaders begin holding secret meetings of their own, often under the guise of social gatherings. You attend one such meeting in a barn lit by lanterns where a group of farmers and small landowners debate whether they should align with the criollos' vision. They worry about retaliation from Spain, but one old man, his face weathered like the land he works, speaks up. "We were born here. This is our home. Spain is far away." His words hang in the air, heavy and true. Even nature seems to conspire in fueling this unrest. Earthquakes rattle the land as they often do in Chile, shaking houses and nerves alike. People murmur about omens, wondering if the earth itself is warning them or encouraging them to act. At night, you gaze at the stars above the Andes, feeling that same sense of something inevitable approaching. The colony is no longer just restless. It is awake. By the end of this period, whispers have grown into conversations, conversations into plans. While the Spanish crown still believes it holds Chile firmly in its grasp, the truth is slipping like sand through its fingers. Somewhere deep in the heart of this colony, rebellion has already taken root, quiet but alive, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be hidden. The sun rises slowly over the Andes, turning the snowcaps a soft pink before flooding Santiago with gold, but the beauty of the morning can't hide the unease in the air. As you make your way through the bustling city, the news trickles in. Spain is in turmoil. Napoleon has invaded the Iberian Peninsula, King Ferdinand VII has been captured, and the once mighty empire looks fractured and uncertain. You hear the news first, whispered in the markets, then boldly proclaimed in the salons. The colony, once tightly bound to its distant king, now finds its chain loosened, though whether to break it or cling to it is still undecided. Spain's weakness sends ripples across the Atlantic, and in Chile every faction interprets it differently. Royalists argue that loyalty to the crown is more important than ever, that the colony must stand by its king in his hour of need. Others, however, see the chaos as an opportunity to step into self-rule, to decide their own fate rather than wait for a crumbling empire to dictate it. Historians still argue whether this was purely a strategic calculation or if a true ideological commitment to independence was already simmering. As you listen to debates in the plaza, you realize it doesn't matter. What matters is that people now dare to question what was once unquestionable. Traveling south toward Concepcion, you find the same tension echoed there. The criollos, inspired by the weakening Spanish grip, hold clandestine meetings in candlelit rooms, discussing how to organize themselves should the crown completely lose control. In these gatherings, maps are spread on wooden tables, fingers trace borders, and plans are whispered. Some propose forming a local Junta, a governing council that would rule in the king's name but without Spanish interference. Others insist the time for half measures is over. They want full independence. Their arguments clash like swords, but the mere fact that they're being spoken aloud is revolutionary. Meanwhile, indigenous Mapuche leaders watch these events with their own perspective. They have never been fully subdued by Spain, their resistance legendary in the southern territories. Now, with the colonizers distracted by their own struggles, some Mapuche see an opportunity to strengthen their autonomy. You ride through their lands and notice how their warriors train with quiet determination, not fully trusting either side. Their presence serves as a constant reminder. Independence movements are rarely simple, and alliances are forged as much from necessity as from shared ideals. Back in Santiago, the streets buzz with rumors about Napoleon's control over Spain. The French emperor's name is uttered with both fear and admiration. Fear, because he has toppled king's admiration, because he embodies the power of change. Some criollos even wonder if a figure like him could emerge here in the shadow of the Andes. The Spanish authorities, sensing the danger, try to suppress these discussions. They send spies into taverns and tighten restrictions on gatherings, but the harder they squeeze, the more ideas slip through their fingers. One evening, you find yourself at a small inn where a group of young officers drink and talk freely, their voices rising with each cup. They mock Spain's weakness, laugh about Napoleon's victories, and then fall silent as one of them eyes, shining with both fear and excitement, asks, "Why should we wait for Spain to save itself? Why not save ourselves first?" The question lingers, like smoke in the room, impossible to ignore. By 1808 and 1809, the pressure builds further. The colonial administration continues to enforce loyalty, but its authority feels hollow. Local militias, originally meant to defend Spanish interests, begin to answer more to their local leaders than to the crown. You witness training sessions in the countryside where men practice with muskets, their uniforms mismatch their purpose. Clear, they are preparing for something bigger than anyone dares to name aloud. Even nature seems to mirror the unrest. A sudden storm sweeps over Santiago one night, tearing tiles from roofs and flooding streets. You watch from a doorway as lightning illuminates the sky, and you can't help but feel it's a warning, or perhaps a promise, that change is coming. The colony's calm has become a facade, cracking with every passing week. Finally, word spreads of juntas forming in other parts of Spanish America: Buenos Aires, Caracas, Bogotá. Their bold actions inspire Chileans, proving that rebellion is not just a dream whispered in dark corners. If others can stand up to Spain, why not here? In the salons, voices grow louder. In the markets, conversations turn openly to what might happen next. Even the priests, once the crown's most loyal allies, begin to preach sermons that emphasize the right of people to govern themselves when kings fail to protect them. By the end of this period, the question is no longer whether the old order will break, but when. The colony stands like a bowstring pulled tight, ready to release. Spain's troubles have shaken the Andes without a single battle fought here. As you walk through Santiago at dusk, the sky glows red behind the mountains, and you sense the fire that is about to catch. The shadows lengthen, but in the hearts of those you pass, the light of something dangerous and beautiful is already burning. The morning of September 18th, 1810 begins like any other in Santiago, with church bells chiming and vendors setting up their stalls, yet you feel an undeniable electricity in the air. The plaza fills with carriages and horses, the elite gathering in their finest attire, but this is no ordinary gathering. Today, the Cabildo Abierto, the open town meeting, will decide something extraordinary: whether Chile will continue to obey the distant Spanish monarchy or chart a path under its own authority. You weave through the crowd, catching snippets of conversations, the word Junta slipping from lips with equal parts hope and trepidation. Inside the Cabildo building, tension hangs thick. Local leaders debate fiercely, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. Some argue for loyalty to the imprisoned Ferdinand VII, insisting that any break from Spain would bring chaos. Others, emboldened by the weakening of the crown, push for autonomy, claiming that Chile must govern itself while the king is powerless. The arguments are passionate, sharp, and dangerous. Words here could shape the destiny of a nation. Bernardo O'Higgins, still a rising figure, listens intently while men like Mateo de Toro y Zambrano, the aged governor, reluctantly preside over a meeting that will change history. Outside, the crowd swells, restless and anxious, craning their necks toward the Cabildo doors. You feel the collective breath held tight as voices echo from within. A vendor next to you mutters, "They will never dare." Another counters, "Oh, they will." Children chase each other through the square, oblivious to the weight of the moment, while soldiers stand nearby, hands on their weapons, uncertain whom they might be ordered to protect or suppress. By late afternoon, the decision emerges: a local junta is established, proclaiming itself the governing body in the absence of the Spanish king. The news ripples outward like a stone tossed into a still pond. First silence, stunned disbelief, then cheers erupt, filling the plaza with a sound that makes your skin tingle. Chile has not yet declared full independence, but this is the first cry, the first crack in Spain's hold. The junta pledges loyalty to the captured king, a clever political move to avoid outright war while asserting self-rule. But everyone senses what this truly means. The old chain has snapped halfway, and there's no repairing it. You walk through the streets that evening as lanterns glow brighter than usual, celebrations spilling from houses. Wine flows freely, songs rise into the night, and even those who fear the unknown future can't help but smile at the thought of something new. Children wave makeshift flags while elders shake their heads, muttering that Spain will never let this stand. Historians still argue whether the junta's formation was a calculated political maneuver or an inevitable act of rebellion. To you standing in the heart of Santiago, it feels like both. In the following days, the new junta begins to govern, and you see the changes firsthand. Local militias are strengthened, trade restrictions eased, and voices that once whispered now speak openly of freedom. Yet the path is far from smooth. Royalists loyal to Spain fume, plotting to restore full control, while others argue among themselves about how far this movement should go. Some demand full independence immediately, others fear provoking a brutal Spanish response. You sense that the unity of this moment is fragile like glass already cracked. Rumors spread quickly that Spanish loyalists in the south are mobilizing, while across the Andes, news arrives of battles fought in other parts of South America. The revolutionary fever spreads, but so too does the threat of war. One night, you overhear a hushed conversation in a dimly lit tavern. Men whisper of secret royalist plans to crush the junta. The danger is real, and the revolution's first step has painted a target on Santiago's back. You ride out to the countryside where farmers and peasants discuss the news in simple but profound terms. Some cheer, others shrug, saying their lives remain the same, regardless of who governs. Yet even in their indifference, you hear a shift. They no longer speak of Spain as an unquestioned master. The idea of change, once distant, now walks among them like a familiar guest. In Concepcion, tensions boil higher. Royalists tighten their grip, clashing with revolutionary forces in small skirmishes that foreshadow the coming storm. The Mapuche, as always, watch with cautious interest, aware that this conflict is not truly theirs, but could reshape the lands they have defended for centuries. By the end of the year, the initial euphoria fades into a wary determination. The junta governs, but Spain is far from defeated. From Lima, the viceroy of Peru, Spain's stronghold in South America, sends warnings, troops, and plans to reconquer Chile. The colony has taken its first daring step, but the path ahead is steep, dark, and lined with the thorns of civil war. As you stand atop Cerro Santa Lucia once more, gazing at Santiago bathed in moonlight, you feel the weight of what has begun. The city hums with new energy, like a heartbeat speeding up before a sprint. Independence is still a distant star, but now it shines clearly above the Andes, and no amount of Spanish darkness can fully snuff it out. The jubilation from the formation of the junta fades, as the years following 1810 unfold into something far messier than the hopeful voices in Santiago had imagined. You wake one morning to the distant rumble of hooves and the heavy thud of marching boots. Chile is no longer merely debating its future, it is tearing itself apart over it. The initial unity that fueled the first cries of self-rule fractures under the strain of conflicting loyalties. Royalists loyal to Spain and determined to restore colonial order rally their forces in the south, while patriots inspired by the junta push toward outright independence. Between them lies a land scarred by fierce suspicion and sudden violence. You travel through rural villages where neighbors no longer trust one another. One man supports the patriots, convinced that freedom is worth any price. The other clings to the crown, believing that Spanish rule at least ensures stability. These arguments spill into fists, then into blood. Farmers who once shared harvests now sharpen blades against each other. Historians still argue whether the Civil War was inevitable or if wiser leaders could have held the fragile unity together. You see it firsthand. Fear and pride are stronger than compromise. The first major clashes erupt in 1811 and 1812, skirmishes small in scale but immense in consequence. You ride alongside patriot militias, ill-equipped, their uniforms mismatched, their weapons rusted, but their eyes burn with conviction. They drill in open fields under banners that flutter proudly in the wind, while in the distance, Spanish royalist troops, disciplined and better armed, prepare to crush them. The first shots ring out near Rancagua and Talca, where patriot and royalist forces collide in bursts of smoke and chaos. You witness the smell of gunpowder mingling with the scent of trampled earth, the shouts of men clashing in a storm of fear and courage. In Santiago, politics grows just as turbulent as the battlefield. The Junta splinters into factions, each claiming to fight for the same ideals while undermining one another. Some leaders call for moderation, still pledging loyalty to the imprisoned Ferdinand VII, while radicals demand immediate independence. You attend a heated meeting in a crowded hall, where tempers flare, chairs scrape and fists slam against wooden tables. The arguments are so fierce they nearly drown out the church bells outside. From the back of the room you notice Bernardo O'Higgins listening quietly, his brow furrowed, absorbing every word as he prepares to step forward into history. Meanwhile, royalist forces receive reinforcements from Peru, Spain's stronghold in South America. These troops march south from the Andes, their flags bearing the Spanish emblem, determined to restore order through force. You trail them to witness their ruthless efficiency. Villages suspected of aiding patriots are burned, and suspected rebels are dragged away in chains. The sight fills you with dread, yet it also steels the resolve of those who oppose them. Patriots who once hesitated now harden into fighters. In 1814, the war's tension crescendos at the Battle of Rancagua. You stand on the hillside overlooking the town as O'Higgins and his men make a desperate stand against a superior royalist force. The streets fill with smoke, the cries of the wounded echo off adobe walls, and flames consume houses as patriots fight to the last breath. The defeat is devastating. Rancagua falls. Santiago soon follows, and royalists reassert their grip on Chile. You feel the weight of despair settle over the land. The fragile dream of independence seems shattered, and O'Higgins retreats across the Andes into exile in Mendoza. The Spanish restore control, brutally re-establishing their authority with an iron hand. You watch as Santiago returns to an eerie silence. The market subdued, the salons empty of bold speeches. Soldiers patrol the streets again, their muskets gleaming under the sun as if to remind everyone who's in charge. Yet under this forced calm you notice something different. The people's spirit has not been broken. If anything, the occupation only deepens their resolve. Secret meetings resume, whispers turn to promises, and eyes turn toward the Andes, where O'Higgins and other exiled leaders begin to regroup. Even nature seems to mirror this turmoil. Earthquakes shake the land during this period, toppling walls and scattering lives as if the earth itself protests the violence. You stand amid the rubble of a collapsed building in Santiago, watching people dig through debris, their faces streaked with dust and determination. Despite the hardship, they rebuild, because they believe something greater still lies ahead. In exile, the patriots do not idle. They form alliances with figures like José de San Martín in Argentina, uniting under a shared vision to free South America from Spanish rule. You glimpse their preparations in Mendoza, where the exiled Chileans train under the harsh sun, their discipline growing sharper each day. They sharpen swords, polish rifles, and most importantly, strengthen their hope. The Civil War has not extinguished their fight, it has tempered it like steel. As the year closes, you return to Santiago, walking through streets haunted by both fear and defiance. The Spanish banners flutter again, but they do so uneasily. The city seems quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The patriots have been defeated, yes, but they have not been destroyed. Across the mountains, in secret camps, a new force is gathering, one that will march back with vengeance and vision. Standing at the base of the Andes, you gaze up at the snowy peaks glowing faintly under the moon. Somewhere beyond those mountains, O'Higgins and San Martin are preparing for the moment to strike back. You shiver not from the cold, but from the sense that the true fight for Chile's soul has only just begun. The chill of exile bites at your skin as you make your way into Mendoza, Argentina, where the air is thin but alive with purpose. Here, far from Spanish-controlled Chile, a remarkable alliance is taking shape. You watch as Bernardo O'Higgins, the fiery Chilean patriot who survived Rancagua, joins forces with General José de San Martín, the Argentine commander, whose eyes seem to hold the entire map of South America. The two men stand in the open camp one morning, frost crunching under their boots, and shake hands with a quiet determination that sends ripples through the soldiers gathered around them. This moment is not simply the meeting of two leaders, it is the merging of two revolutions. In the camp, discipline and hope grow side by side. You hear the clatter of muskets being cleaned, the metallic rhythm of swords sharpening, and the barked orders of officers drilling their men from dawn until dusk. These are not the ragged militias of early skirmishes. This is an army in the making, hardened by defeat, tempered by exile, and inspired by the vision of freedom. They call themselves the Army of the Andes, and even the name sounds like a promise. Around the campfires at night, the soldiers tell stories of home vineyards in the valleys, waves crashing on the Chilean coast, and swear they will see those places free again. The planning is meticulous. San Martín, with the precision of a chess master, lays out maps and plots routes across the Andes that seem impossible. You stand over his shoulder as he traces a line with his finger, cutting through mountains so high they seem to pierce the sky. Many doubt it can be done. The Andes are not just mountains. They are jagged giants draped in snow and ice, the kind of place where even strong men can vanish in a single storm. Historians still argue whether this crossing was an act of genius or madness. Looking at the sheer peaks rising in the distance, you suspect it is both. Meanwhile, O'Higgins rallies his men with speeches that mix fiery conviction with a touch of gentle humor. You hear him telling a group of weary soldiers, "Yes, it's cold, and yes, the Spaniards are strong, but tell me, has a Chilean ever been afraid of a little frost?" The men laugh, and in that laughter you sense their fear melting, replaced by something sturdier pride. Even in the darkest nights under stars so bright, they feel close enough to touch the camp hums with a quiet confidence. As weeks pass, reinforcements trickle in, supplies are gathered, and alliances deepen. You notice how San Martín and O'Higgins complement each other, one calm and calculating, the other passionate and bold. They share a vision, not just for Chile, but for all of South America, a continent free from Spanish rule. Their partnership becomes legendary, though not without disagreements. Around the camp, you catch wind of their arguments about strategy, about leadership, but you also see them clasping shoulders afterward, unified by a cause greater than either man. Back in Spanish-controlled Chile, the royalists grow complacent, believing the patriots too broken to rise again. They patrol the streets of Santiago lazily, their boots clacking on cobblestones, oblivious to the storm gathering beyond the horizon. You slip through the city listening to the hushed voices of those who still support the cause. They pass messages, hide weapons, and prepare in secret for the day the patriots return. Even under Spanish occupation, resistance quietly breathes. The royalists send scouts to monitor the Andes, but the mountains themselves guard the patriots' secrets. Snowstorms swallow sound and fog hides movement. You travel with a group of spies one night, watching them squint through the mist, only to return empty-handed, convinced the enemy will never dare such a suicidal crossing. In Mendoza, preparations near their end. Horses are shod cannons broken down to be carried in pieces and provisions packed tightly. You hear San Martín addressing his officers under the pale glow of a lantern, his voice steady. "We are not merely crossing mountains, we are crossing into history." The soldiers cheer, and you feel the ground almost vibrate with their conviction. O'Higgins follows, lifting his sword and shouting, "For Chile, for freedom." The response is deafening, echoing against the peaks. As the army finalizes its preparations, you wander the camp one last night before the march begins. Fires crackle, casting orange halos on faces lined with both fear and determination. A young soldier sits sharpening his bayonet, murmuring a prayer under his breath. Another writes a letter to his mother, folding it neatly, as if words could cross mountains faster than men. You realize that every single one of them knows the cost of what they're about to do, and they accept it. By early 1817, the Army of the Andes is ready. You stand at the foot of the mountains, the peaks towering above like frozen sentinels. The air is thin, your breath already burning in your chest, and you think to yourself, how can humans possibly climb this? Yet as the first columns begin to move, banners fluttering, you sense that something larger than human strength is at play here. It is the force of an idea, a free Chile, that pushes them forward. From behind, the sun rises spilling gold over the jagged ridges, and the army marches into the shadows of the peaks. The path is treacherous, the wind howls like a predator, but not a single man falters. The mountains may try to stop them, but you already know they will not succeed. The Andes are about to witness one of history's most daring feats. The cold bites deeper than you ever imagined as you climb with the army of the Andes, the snow beneath your boots crunching like brittle glass. The mountains loom in every direction, white peaks stabbing the sky ridges, twisting endlessly, sheer cliffs dropping into abyssal valleys. You feel the altitude burn in your lungs. Each breath feels like pulling air through a straw. And yet around you, hundreds of soldiers march steadily, their faces pale but resolute, their steps slow but unyielding. This is no ordinary march, it is a gamble against nature itself, and the stakes are the freedom of a nation. The army moves in several columns, each taking a different route across the Andes, a strategy devised by San Martín to confuse the Spanish. You trek alongside one of these columns, watching as mules slip on icy paths, their loads of cannons and supplies swaying dangerously. Men strain to push the artillery up steep inclines, their boots digging into the snow. Frost clings to their beards, their fingers numb, yet not one complains aloud. They wrap themselves in ragged ponchos, sleep on frozen ground, and eat what little food they have. Charqui hard bread and a sip of bitter Métis tea to keep their spirits alive. At night the cold is so intense that even the stars seem to shiver. You huddle near a campfire, listening to the wind shrieking through the mountain passes like a ghostly chorus. Around you, men whisper prayers, some to God, others to the spirits of the Andes. One soldier jokes that the mountains are testing them like some divine trial to prove they deserve victory. The others laugh weakly, their teeth chattering, and you realize that humor is their last defense against despair. Historians still argue how many died during the crossing. Some say a few dozen, others claim hundreds, but you know that every loss is felt like a wound in the march. The path grows steeper with each day. Avalanches threaten to sweep men away without warning, and freezing winds slice through the thickest cloaks. You pass a spot where a mule has fallen, its cargo of cannon parts spilling into a ravine, and soldiers stand silently for a moment before continuing. The army leaves no time for mourning. Survival depends on constant movement. Yet even amid the suffering, there is an odd beauty to this ordeal. When dawn breaks, sunlight paints the snow in pinks and golds, and you catch glimpses of condors soaring above, as if the mountains themselves are watching and approving. San Martín rides at the head of one column, wrapped in his greatcoat eyes, scanning the treacherous terrain. He is calm, commanding his presence like an anchor for the men. You hear him say to an officer, "We will reach the other side even if half of us must crawl." The officer nods grimly, and the march continues. Meanwhile, O'Higgins, leading another column, rallies his men with bursts of energy, shouting encouragement as they climb. His voice cuts through the wind like a blade, reminding everyone why they endure this torture for Chile. One evening, as you rest at a makeshift camp high above the clouds, you overhear a conversation between two soldiers. One wonders aloud why they are risking their lives in these frozen heights. The other answers simply because the mountains are the price of freedom. The words stick with you, echoing in your mind as you fall asleep to the sound of the wind howling like a distant drumbeat. After nearly 3 weeks of grueling marches, the columns finally emerge from the mountains, descending into the valleys of Chile. The first glimpses of green after endless white feel like a dream. You watch as the soldiers, weary but alive, cheer and embrace one another, their faces lit by a mixture of relief and triumph. They have done what seemed impossible. They have crossed the Andes, and they have done so as an army ready to fight. The royalists in Chile, lulled into false security, have no idea that an avalanche of men is about to crash upon them. As the army regroups in the valleys, the air changes. The biting cold is replaced by the crisp scent of grass and earth, the sound of streams running clear. You sense the energy among the men shift from mere survival to anticipation. They polish their weapons, tend to their wounds, and prepare for battle. Scouts report royalist movements ahead, and plans for the coming confrontation begin to take shape. San Martín studies maps with his officers, his finger tracing a path toward Santiago. You hear him declare, "We will strike at Chacabuco. There we will decide the fate of Chile." Even in this moment of reprieve, the cost of the crossing is visible. Many soldiers limp, others bear frostbite on their hands and feet, and the empty spaces in the ranks tell the story of those who never made it. Yet their sacrifice fuels the determination of the survivors. Around the campfires, the soldiers speak not of fear, but of victory. They believe with unshakable certainty that the mountains have made them invincible. On the eve of battle, the sky clears, revealing stars so bright they seem to pierce the darkness. You stand at the edge of the camp, the Andes rising behind you like silent guardians, and you feel the weight of history pressing close. The mountains have tested the patriots, and they have emerged stronger. Tomorrow the enemy waits, and with it, the chance to reclaim Santiago. The wind whispers through the valleys, carrying with it the distant scent of smoke and the promise of war. You take one last look at the snow-covered peaks, knowing they will forever hold the memory of this impossible crossing. The men rest with their weapons by their sides, ready to rise with the dawn. Soon cannons will roar, muskets will crack, and the patriots will face the royalists at Chacabuco. The hardest climb is behind them, but the most decisive fight is just ahead. The sun rises on February 12, 1817, casting a pale glow over the dusty plains near the hacienda of Chacabuco. You stand among the ranks of the Patriot Army, the cold morning air carrying the metallic scent of oiled weapons and the murmured prayers of soldiers. Behind you, the Andes loom like silent witnesses, their peaks still glistening with snow from the legendary crossing. Ahead lies the Royalist army entrenched and waiting, their cannons gleaming in the early light. This is the day that will decide whether the suffering endured in the mountains was worth it, or whether it will all end in failure. General San Martín surveys the battlefield with calm precision, his horse stamping restlessly beneath him. Beside him, O'Higgins radiates a fierce energy, his eyes locked on the royalist lines. You hear San Martín's voice carry over the wind as he issues final orders. The Patriot Army will attack in 2 divisions, flanking the enemy and cutting off their escape. The plan is daring, but then again everything about this campaign has been daring. Soldiers tighten the straps of their packs, check their muskets, and glance toward the enemy trenches where Spanish flags flutter defiantly. A heavy silence settles, broken only by the rhythmic beat of drums signaling the advance. As the battle begins, you march forward with the troops' muskets raised. The first volley of royalist cannon fire shatters the silence, and the ground trembles beneath your feet. Smoke billows across the field, thick and choking, and you can barely see through it as bullets whistle past. The patriots charge their cries, rising above the chaos, and you feel the adrenaline surge as men leap over ditches and clash bayonets with the enemy. The air fills with the roar of muskets, the thunder of hooves, and the sharp clang of steel meeting steel. The royalists fight fiercely, their artillery tearing gaps in the patriot lines, but the momentum is with the army of the Andes. You watch as O'Higgins leads a daring cavalry charge, his saber flashing in the sunlight as he cuts through enemy lines. His men follow with fearless determination, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they carve a path toward the heart of the royalist position. At the same time, San Martín's main force presses forward methodically, overwhelming the enemy with coordinated volleys. The battlefield becomes a blur of movement, sound, and fear. You stumble over fallen men, patriots and royalists alike, while smoke stings your eyes and fills your lungs. Amid the chaos, you spot a young soldier clutching a torn flag, refusing to let it fall, even as he collapses. The image sears itself into your memory. This is what freedom costs. Historians still argue whether Chacabuco was won by strategy or by sheer willpower, but standing here, you feel it was both. Hours drag by like lifetimes until finally the royalist line begins to break. You hear the cry, spread like wildfire, Victoria. The patriots surge forward, driving the enemy into retreat. The royalist commander, Rafael Maroto, flees with the remnants of his forces, leaving the battlefield littered with abandoned cannons, shattered muskets, and the bodies of those who will never see another sunrise. The patriots capture hundreds of prisoners, and the royalist grip on central Chile crumbles in a single, decisive blow. When the smoke finally clears, you stand among the exhausted soldiers, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, their uniforms torn but their eyes shining. The cost is heavy. Many comrades lie silent on the field, but the victory is undeniable. O'Higgins rides past, his face grim yet triumphant, raising his sword to the cheering men. San Martín, ever composed, simply nods in approval, knowing the path to Santiago is now open. As the army marches toward the capital, villagers pour out to greet them, waving improvised flags, offering food and water and shouting blessings. The joy is infectious. Even the most battle-hardened soldiers smile as children run alongside the columns, calling them heroes. In Santiago, the Spanish authorities flee and the city erupts in celebration as the patriots enter in triumph. You walk through the streets lined with flowers and banners, feeling the weight of history pressing against your shoulders. On February 14th, O'Higgins is named Supreme Director of Chile, a title he accepts with both pride and solemnity. You watch as he addresses the crowd from the balcony of the Cabildo, his voice strong. Chile is free. The cheers that follow roll through the city like thunder. Yet, as the echoes fade, you notice the lines of worry on his face. Freedom won on the battlefield must now be defended in governance, and the challenges ahead loom as large as the Andes themselves. That night, Santiago glows with lanterns, music, and fireworks, but beneath the celebration lies a sober truth. The royalists have been defeated, yes, but not destroyed. They still control the south, and Spain will not give up its colonies so easily. The war is far from over. Still, for this moment, you let yourself breathe in the sweet air of victory. You climb Cerro Santa Lucia once more, the city spread out below you, bathed in flickering light. The mountains stand silent in the distance, guardians of the impossible feat that made this day possible. The wind carries the sounds of laughter songs and distant drums. For the first time in years, Santiago feels alive, not just surviving, but free. The fight will continue, but tonight you allow yourself to stand in the glow of triumph. The months after Chacabuco pass in a blur of rebuilding, organizing, and preparing for the inevitable royalist response. You wander through Santiago's streets and notice the mix of pride and anxiety etched into every face. Patriots celebrate the victory, but everyone knows Spain will strike back. O'Higgins, now Supreme Director, works tirelessly to consolidate the fragile gains. You see him in meetings late into the night, candlelight flickering over maps as he plans the next steps. His leadership is firm but compassionate. He visits wounded soldiers, speaks to farmers, and assures the city that Chile's freedom will not be lost. Yet the burden he carries weighs heavily. Royalist forces refusing to accept defeat regroup in the south. You hear reports from the countryside, Spanish loyalists gathering strength in Chillán and Talcahuano, reinforced by troops from Peru. Their commanders are determined to crush the rebellion and reclaim Santiago. In the taverns, people whisper of atrocities committed by royalist soldiers, burning villages suspected of aiding patriots. Fear spreads like smoke, but so does defiance. Patriots tighten their defenses and new recruits flock to O'Higgins' banner, ready to fight for the independence they tasted at Chacabuco. In the months that follow, the patriots face not only external threats, but internal divisions. Political rivals challenge O'Higgins' authority, criticizing his decisions and accusing him of wielding too much power. In the salons of Santiago, voices rise in heated debate, some calling him a hero, others warning of dictatorship. You attend one such gathering where arguments flare, wine spills, and a glass shatters against the floor. Historians still argue whether O'Higgins' leadership was visionary or authoritarian. Watching him walk away from these disputes, shoulders stiff, you suspect he sees no difference. To him, survival comes first. The conflict escalates as royalist forces push north, forcing the patriots into skirmishes that test their resilience. You ride with O'Higgins' army as they engage the enemy near Cancha Rayada in early 1818. The battle is chaos guns, roar, horses scream, and the night sky burns with musket fire. Amid the confusion, a devastating royalist counterattack shatters the patriot lines, sending soldiers fleeing in disarray. You feel the ground shake as cannons thunder, and the cries of retreat echo through the darkness. The patriots suffer a crushing defeat and panic spreads like wildfire. For a moment it feels as though the dream of independence is collapsing. Yet out of the chaos, O'Higgins rises wounded but unbroken. Carried from the battlefield with an arm shattered by a bullet, he refuses to abandon the fight. In Santiago, he rallies the survivors, calling for reinforcements and rebuilding the army with iron determination. You witness his fiery speech to the troops, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We have been struck down but not defeated. Chile's freedom lives as long as we fight." The soldiers cheer their fear, melting into resolve. Even in the darkest hour, hope refuses to die. Support arrives from unexpected quarters. Women in Santiago organize to supply the army with food and clothing, sewing uniforms by candlelight. Farmers donate grain, blacksmiths forge weapons, and young boys run messages through dangerous territory. Everywhere you look, ordinary people fuel the cause, turning defeat into a rallying cry. Across the Andes, San Martín sends reinforcements, solidifying the bond between the Argentine and Chilean struggles. The two leaders meet once more, their handshake firmer than before, both understanding the next battle will be decisive. By March 1818, the Patriot Army stands ready to face the Royalists at Maipú near Santiago. You travel with them to the rolling fields where the final confrontation will unfold. Soldiers set up camp under a sky streaked with crimson and gold, the setting sun painting the landscape with a beauty almost cruel in its contrast to the blood that will soon spill there. Around the fires, men sharpen bayonets, polish rifles, and share stories of families they hope to see again. The air is thick with tension, but also with an unshakable sense of destiny. The night before battle, O'Higgins, still recovering from his wounds, rides through the camp. His arm is in a sling, yet he sits tall in the saddle, his voice carrying over the soldiers' heads. Tomorrow, Chile decides if she lives free or dies enslaved. The cheers that follow shake the very earth. You glance at San Martín, who watches in silence, his face calm, as if he already knows victory is within reach. Dawn breaks and you feel the ground tremble under the marching of thousands of boots. The Royalists, confident after their success at Cancha Rayada, await the Patriots on the open field. Their cannons glint in the early light, their ranks tight and disciplined. Across the plain, the Patriots form their lines, banners snapping in the breeze, determination etched into every face. You realize that this battle is not just for territory, it is for the soul of Chile. The stage is set, the armies poised like drawn swords. You tighten your grip on your musket and glance once more at the mountains in the distance. They stand silent as they always do, but you swear they are watching, holding their breath. Soon the first shots will fire, and the fate of a nation will be decided in a storm of smoke, steel, and courage. The morning of April 5, 1818, dawns with an eerie stillness over the fields of Maipú. Mist clings to the grass, curling around the boots of soldiers as they ready their weapons. You can hear the nervous murmurs of the patriot ranks, the clinking of bayonets being fixed, and the distant neighing of horses. Across the plain, the royalists under General Mariano Osorio stand poised, their lines bristling with muskets and artillery. The two armies face each other like coiled predators, and you know the peace will not last. This is the battle that will decide Chile's fate. As the sun climbs higher, its golden light cuts through the fog, revealing the glitter of steel on both sides. San Martín, calm as ever, rides along the Patriot lines, his voice steady as he urges his soldiers to hold their ground. O'Higgins, still recovering from his wound, is carried to the battlefield in a litter, refusing to remain behind. You see the fire in his eyes as he raises his good arm to signal the troops, his voice carrying with an almost defiant force. This day, Chile is born free. The cheer that erupts from the ranks sweeps across the field like a wave, and the ground seems to tremble under the weight of thousands of beating hearts. The battle begins with the roar of cannons shaking the earth as smoke engulfs the horizon. You flinch as the first volleys of musket fire crackle, filling the air with the sharp stench of gunpowder. The Patriot infantry advances, their bayonets glinting in the sun, while cavalry units thunder across the field, kicking up clouds of dust. Royalist artillery tears gaps in the Patriot lines, but they close ranks quickly, pushing forward with relentless determination. The noise is deafening, drums pounding, horses screaming, men shouting orders, drowned by the chaos. You sprint alongside the troops as they clash with the Royalists, steel against steel, musket against musket. The smoke thickens until you can barely see the enemy, only shadows moving in the haze. Amid the chaos, you catch sight of the Patriot cavalry under Ramon Freire smashing into the Royalist flank, scattering enemy soldiers like leaves in the wind. O'Higgins, though unable to fight, continues to inspire, his voice echoing across the battlefield as he urges his men to press on. Hours stretch like days as the fighting rages. You witness moments of raw heroism, soldiers charging against impossible odds, comrades pulling the wounded to safety, officers rallying their men amid the storm. At one point, a Royalist counterattack pushes deep into the Patriot lines, threatening to break them, but San Martín calmly redirects his reserves, sealing the breach with precision. The tide begins to turn. By midday, the Royalist army falters. You see their lines wavering, their officers shouting desperately to hold formation. The Patriot artillery fires with deadly accuracy, ripping holes through the enemy ranks. Then, with a final surge, the Patriot infantry storms forward, overwhelming the Royalists with sheer willpower. Flags wave high amid the smoke, and the battle cries of "Viva Chile Libre" ring louder than the cannon blasts. Osorio realizes the battle is lost and flees the field, his troops scattering in disarray. You stand amidst the carnage, the acrid smoke stinging your eyes as the last pockets of resistance crumble. The Patriots surge into victory, capturing cannons, flags, and prisoners. The ground is littered with the fallen, a silent testament to the price of freedom. Despite the grief, the cheers of the survivors rise like thunder, shaking the field where history has just been written. As the smoke clears, the scale of the victory becomes clear. The Royalists are crushed. Their power in central Chile is broken beyond repair. You watch as San Martín dismounts, wiping the sweat from his brow, his expression serene yet proud. O'Higgins, pale and exhausted, smiles faintly as he is carried onto the field to embrace his comrades. The two leaders clasp hands, their partnership cemented by this triumph. The soldiers cheer, waving their weapons in the air, and for the first time you feel that independence is not just a dream, it is real. In the days that follow, Santiago erupts with celebrations. Bells ring from every church tower, flowers rain down on the returning army, and the streets overflow with joy. The people call O'Higgins a liberator, and San Martín a hero. You walk through the city at night, lanterns glowing in every window, music and laughter spilling into the streets. For a moment, all the pain, all the sacrifice seems worth it. Chile is free, yet beneath the celebrations, the challenges of building a nation quickly emerge. O'Higgins takes the reins as Supreme Director once more, facing the monumental task of transforming victory into stability. He abolishes noble titles, promotes education, and dreams of a modern republic. But his reforms, while visionary, stir opposition among conservative elites. Political divisions deepen and whispers of discontent begin to spread. Historians still debate whether O'Higgins was too far ahead of his time or simply too rigid to adapt. Years later, under mounting pressure, O'Higgins resigns and leaves Chile, choosing exile over civil war. You watch him depart from the port of Valparaiso, the sea reflecting the sadness in his eyes. He leaves behind a free nation, though one still struggling to define itself. As his ship disappears over the horizon, you realize that independence is never a single moment. It is a journey that continues long after the battles are won. The years pass and Chile endures, forging its identity through trials and triumphs. You stand once more on the slopes of the Andes, the wind whispering through the grass, and think back to the men who crossed these mountains, fought at Chacabuco and Maipú, and dreamed of a free homeland. Their legacy lives on in every breath of this land, in every heartbeat of the nation they helped create. The sky turns golden as the sun sets, casting long shadows over the mountains. The war is over, but the story never truly ends. It lingers in the valleys, in the rivers, in the spirit of the people who call Chile home. You close your eyes and let the wind carry the final echo, freedom, hard-won and eternal. As the battles fade into memory, the narration softens, lengthening like the shadows at dusk. You find yourself walking through a quiet Santiago long after the drums of war have fallen silent. The city hums with life, no longer trembling under a foreign crown, but still learning what it means to be free. The streets you once walked in, fear now glow with a gentle light, the sound of laughter spilling from doorways, the scent of bread warm in the air. It is a different kind of victory, the slow, patient kind that comes not with cannon fire but with the steady heartbeat of a people shaping their destiny. The Andes stand as they always have, timeless and indifferent, yet you feel they remember. They remember the frost-bitten soldiers who climbed their peaks with hope burning hotter than the cold. They remember the banners that fluttered against their icy winds and the footsteps of men who refused to bow. Every breeze that sweeps down from those mountains carries whispers of courage. Every star above seems to shine a little brighter in honor of what was won here. As you linger in this peaceful moment, you realize that the story of Chile's independence is not just one of battles fought and kings defied. It is the story of resilience, of voices refusing to be silenced, of people who dared to imagine a world beyond the limits imposed on them. That spirit remains quiet yet unbreakable, like the embers of a fire that never goes out. So you take one last breath of the cool night air, letting the memory of everything you've seen settle deep within you. The lanterns flicker, the stars glow, and the city sleeps soundly beneath them, at peace with its past and hopeful for its future. As the wind drifts softly through the streets, it carries the last echo of your journey, a whisper barely louder than a sigh. Chile is free, and the night is calm.